choice is valid if it serves the preservation of the nation. There's the anti-democratic nature of its ideology and its gain of power. It's actually a lot of things, and some are more important to the definition than others, which is why there are so many definitions. Long, some very short, some too simple, some too detailed. Some are just a popular meme list of bad things about George W. Bush by a former Xerox executive. Some are conservative pundits who want to say, well, actually, the libs are the fascists, or that the left are the real fascists, despite fascism being a movement in uneasy alliance with conservatives against the left, and despite adopting some socialist language. Quote, once in power, fascist regimes banned strikes, dissolved independent labor unions, lowered wage earners' purchasing power, and showered money on armaments industries to the immense satisfaction of employers. A lot of stuff going on, definition-wise, is my point. But more or less, you can find solid definitions from folks like Robert Paxton, Roger Griffin, Umberto Eco, and most communists. But anyway, after Donald Trump did all that stuff I mentioned earlier, the current president, Joe Biden, offhandedly was like, yeah, it's fascism a little bit. Specifically, he said, what we're seeing now is either the beginning or the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy. It's not just Trump, it's the entire philosophy that underpins I'm gonna say something, it's like semi-fascism. Excellent impression of Joe Biden. Now, to be clear, this is true. Not all Republicans, but some of them. Hardcore MAGA types. You know, Omega Extreme Supreme MAGA Trumpists. Piss peeps. Poopy pooper Donald Frumpus and his peepy dumpy doo-doos. Whatever you want to call them. Some of them. But we'll get to that. The point is that when Biden said Trump is a semi-fascist, everyone freaked out, undiped their butts, and laid a gooey turd about how Joey Brigadoon called your gammy and all plumbers Nazis. And then he gave a speech to address it and talk about the threat to democracy that Trump and his movement pose, on account of wanting to overthrow the election and trying to do that. You know, that thing that happened. Incidentally, in our video series about fascism, we recognize that one of our sources, historian Robert Paxton, did not, at the time, necessarily think that Trump was the figurehead of a fascist movement. January 6th changed that for him, and he wrote a piece explaining, oh yeah, right, of course, it's fascism. It may be silly fascism, but it has all of the qualities necessary to consider the word. So kudos to us for our journalistic integrity in acknowledging that in that video series, and kudos to our journalistic ratitude for being correct about it. Another criticism of Trump's fasciness, or lack thereof, was that while he did do a lot of right-wing demagoguery, one necessary element of fascism is a sort of constant internal enemy that must be expelled from society in one way or another. One could argue that he was doing that with immigrants and Muslims, though he wasn't always full-throated or explicit about it. And he was more focused on the keep more of them out aspect of it. Of course, here he is these days.
We will defend our Constitution, we will defend the Second Amendment, and we will proudly uphold the Judeo-Christian values and principles of our nation's founding. We will restore patriotic education to our schools, and we will teach our children to love their country, honor our history, and to always respect our great American flag. Always respect our flag. Despite great outside dangers, our biggest threat remains the sick, sinister, and evil people from within our country. You know who I'm talking about. You see them all the time. But no matter how big or powerful the corrupt radical left Democrats that we are fighting against may be, you must never forget, this nation does not belong to them. This nation belongs to you. That's who it belongs to. This is your home. This is your heritage. And our American liberty is your God-given right.
It's hard to argue that that's not, at least, extremely fascist rhetoric. Not just bad rhetoric, but specifically fascist rhetoric. But whatever, we're not necessarily here to nitpick about a definition, even though we've already done that for a few minutes, and that's what the rest of the episode's about. But the point is, when Joe Biden said this true thing about Trumpism, some of the nation flipped out and turded from their undiped bottoms, especially after his speech about how the last guy tried to overturn the election. I mean, look at him. The guy, he's yelling in front of red in this photo. Red being one of the country's flag's colors. The others, of course, being blue and white in this other photo. But he's like Hitler. Look at the fists. Those are Hitler fists if I ever seen one. Because actually, see, no. There's nothing fascist, or even, dare one say, semi-fascist about Donald Trump or any of the people who really like Donald Trump. Because, see, actually, if one were to read this 6-paragraph, but one of them's a single-sentence article by editor emeritus and founder of Wilkes Brothers, The Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro, Biden, the real semi-fascist, sorry to use a headline from the Daily Times instead, but if I go to the Daily Wire's version, I get a pop-up for Daily Wire Plus's My Dinner with Trump, and when I X out of it, it only shows most of the first paragraph, and in order to read the 6th paragraph, but one of them is a single-sentence article about how Joe Biden's the real semi-fascist, I have to subscribe to Daily Wire Plus, so instead, I'll go to some other free website where the article is syndicated and read it there. Yes, I'm sorry, but it's time to read Ben Shapiro's unbelievably lazy 3rd grader's book report on fascism, and hopefully help him improve it a bit. Because as Ben, maybe, but probably not, seems to be discovering now, perhaps Trump was a bit fascist all along. But more on that later. Let's get out the red pen and get reading. Okay. This week, President Joe Biden, in search of a new label to pin on his political opponents after the failure of his ultra-MAGA branding, which prompted peals of laughter rather than shudders of horror, landed on a new slur with which to tar those who don't support his agenda. They are, he said, semi-fascists. Okay, so first of all, this sentence is extremely long. Way too long, especially for your first sentence. M dashes and a colon in the first sentence? Get real! XY, let's fix it. But anyway, it's important to note that when Ben says those who don't support Biden's agenda, that's very obviously not who Joe Biden's talking about. Joe Manchin doesn't support his agenda. He's not calling Joe Manchin semi-fascist. He's not calling Marco Rubio a semi-fascist. As Biden made clear when he said the words Ben's going to directly quote in a second, Ben explains, speaking with a crowd of Democratic donors in Maryland, Biden reportedly said, "What we're seeing now is either the beginning or the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy. It's not just Trump, it's the entire philosophy that underpins the, I'm going to say something, it's semi-fascism." For your sake, I'm going to skip a paragraph where he pretends to feel personally slighted by Barack Obama on behalf of farmers or whatever, but would like to point out that during this one of the 6 paragraphs, but one of them is a single sentence, he describes it as Democrat politicians painting half of Americans as beneath contempt. And maybe half of Americans is doing quite a lot of work here, considering Biden specifies that he means Trump's hardcore base and about 1/3 of eligible Americans don't even vote. So maybe painting a small fraction of 1/3 of American adults would be a little more accurate. It's nitpicking, but this essay is half of Ben's grade, so it's still important. Let's get to the juicy, round meat. But that fascism smear is particularly galling coming from Biden the same week in which he announced, without any constitutional authority whatsoever, that he was erasing some $500 billion in student loan debts, the single largest executive action in American history. Single largest by what exactly? Amount of money? Does the Emancipation Proclamation not count as a large executive action? The Manhattan Project was funded through executive order. Is that big enough for you? Are all executive orders fascism? Was Trump's Muslim ban not fascism somehow? Student loan forgiveness, executive order, fascism. Muslim ban, no fascism? What about ones enacted because you're fulfilling a campaign promise after being democratically elected to do that thing? Does that count? And then when the court strikes down Biden's student loan forgiveness as unconstitutional, he's like, well, that's a bummer. I urge you to reconsider. Is that fascism? How are we picking and choosing here? I don't know. Maybe we'll figure it out in the text. Ben further complains, Biden justified that action on the basis of a non-existent COVID-19 emergency. Now, we're not going to get in the weeds about whether or not a COVID-19 emergency existed or was